Hello everybody and welcome to the LP podcast. My guest for this episode is Ian Heptinstall. Ian specializes in capital and construction projects with particular interest in system thinking and collaborative procurement. Ian is a course leader for Universities of Birmingham's Masters in Industrial Project Management program. Before moving to academia, his 35 years career has given him an experience in capital projects, procurement and supply chain management. Ian has managed projects as both project owner and supplier, mainly in process industries. Ian also is an author of the Executive Guide to Breakthrough Project Management. And today we are discussing a very interesting and important subject for success of any project, is Project Procurement Management. And thank you very much for accepting the invitation to participate in podcast interview. Today we have a very interesting subject which actually I think is very, very sensitive for many of the organizations, especially for project-based organizations. It is common today for organizations actually to procure major items of their projects from other companies. And some projects today buy up to 90% of their project scope from other organizations. And what's more, often these items, which are bought from external companies, are the high-risk portions of the projects. So actually, what is project procurement? And what does differentiate project procurement from other types of procurement?
Good question. As you said, Ludmila, projects, particularly capital investment type projects, which is my domain, have always worked like that. The project owner has needed to buy in the services, and that is one of the differences in that you've got the one-off nature of something significant compared to the ongoing, repeat, relatively repetitious nature of other kinds of procurement. And within a project, the project itself is one-off, and a lot of its procurement is one-off as well. Not absolutely. There's the question that needs to be raised: to what extent do we use the arrangements that are in place for the underlying organisation? And sometimes that gets a little bit confusing, because at a very simple level, even though you're buying the same thing, component, a bit of steel, a pump, the supply base for, say, small quantities, very urgent delivery for maintenance purposes or for repair, that's actually a different supply base from the larger quantities you need, not at the same lead time, with different inputs, maybe a technical input to select, which is different from a maintenance supply base. So, sometimes I've seen mistakes where the thinking is the thing. Right, we buy pipes, we have a supply of the pipes, let's use them on the project. But a project is a different environment. And procurement, there's a lot more to procurement than simply, that's the same thing, that's where we buy it. Let's put them all together because aggregating volumes is a good thing, isn't it? No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. And I think another feature of projects is the amount of uncertainty. Projects have not been done before, and the people working together on the project are unknown at the beginning because you've not selected them. And the success of things like projects is dominated more by how the people work together, how the elements of the system combine, not how good they are individually.
Sure.
And that's another dimension that needs to take account of when procuring the team to come together. Because I think that quite often I see the issue of trying to over optimize. Who is the best supplier for this particular thing? That's irrelevant, almost. You know, a good enough supplier early on a project, working in the team will probably deliver better results than spending more time to try and find the perfect supplier. For one, they don't exist. So you end up wasting time with silly games trying to over-analyze and over-optimize. And this might seem sacrilege to some in the procurement field. But if the suppliers are that close, toss a coin. It doesn't matter. But what matters is wasting 2 months trying to make a tiny little difference between people. If they're about the same, find a simple way of choosing one. To me, that is fairer than pretending there's a difference and working out that one scored 87.42 against 87.63. Therefore, they're better. No, you're playing a silly game. So that high level uncertainty is another feature that's different from much ongoing procurement. I think also to a procurement professional, the two high level levers for improving value and performance are using the inherent competition in a market, or using intimacy and collaboration with the suppliers that you've chosen to work with. Competition and market competition and supplier collaboration. And that's no different in all kinds of procurement. However, when you use collaboration, and as you know, I think that is very, very important in projects, as we'll come on to no doubt later. The way that you implement and manage those collaborative relationships need to take account of the context. And within a project, they will probably look different from an ongoing collaborative relationship, say, with a key supplier of a component for a motor car. Mm-hmm. So there'll be common elements, but there'll be differences. And sort of making sure that whoever's influencing and shaping procurement on the project is aware and can adapt the general idea of collaboration to the particular circumstance of the project. So that there's some of the differences. I think one of the other differences that I notice is the role for the procurement professional. I think within a project team, it becomes much more facilitation, coaching, establishing methods, but not necessarily doing all the stuff themselves. They're the subject matter expert, but the work is done by many of the project teams. Yeah. Just like is often the case on projects. Yeah, safety, there are safety experts, but everyone within a project has to do their element of work in a way that's compatible to the safety strategy of the project. And it's the same on procurement and on projects. Hundreds of people on the project team need to work with, engage with, get the most from suppliers. And you could say, well, they're doing procurement. It can't be done at arm's length. Yeah. Whereas if I'm getting raw materials for a production facility, once the arrangements are in place, they will repeat over and over again. And it's more an administrative and a logistics issue. I think on projects, it's a bit less that. So the procurement specialists have a different role in sort of shaping and setting things up. Projects, of course, do need people working in procurement to raise purchase orders and pay invoices and manage the transactions. But somebody's got to think about how to set all that up. So it's that developing the project execution strategy and inputting procurement knowledge and expertise to that. If your procurement experience comes from a different environment, you may not be used to that. You might be, you might not. And the same applies to the generic procurement technique of category management. It's just as applicable in project environments as it is in other types of purchasing environments. However, the implementation is often different. And yeah, I've seen, I don't do so much now, but a few years ago, I did an awful lot of procurement related training and coaching. Most of what I did when I spent my time in the Middle East was procurement related, not projects. But I found that category management was often translated to mean volume aggregation and doing big long-term deals.
Absolutely.
It shouldn't be. That is simply a tool. And there's some categories that works well, and there's other categories that's probably the wrong thing to do. It will destroy value. So if category management has been sort of internalized and people have got into habits, when that kind of professional suddenly supports a project, they need to go back to basics. Or sorry, if they move to managing a category that relates to project procurement, if their mindset is what can I aggregate the volume of, then I think their ability to contribute will be much lower than if they think, what are the procurement practices? So as an example of that, when I worked as chief procurement officer in a construction company, we had a whole mix, but one of the categories we were looking at, the category strategy was about leveraging the approach each project used with a local supply base. So we didn't reduce the supply base. We didn't aggregate the volumes and push them to one supplier. We believed we got much better value from ensuring our project teams worked in a particular way with their local suppliers. And it was also a market where the power was not with the companies we contracted with. It was with the global OEMs, the manufacturers, who sold through local companies. So again, if your procurement focus is on the companies we have to contract with, that's not where the decisions are made. You actually need a relationship with the companies that you don't contract with. They're not on your ERP system. Big data will not help you necessarily. You need insight and knowledge. So that's just as applicable, the ideas of category management in a project environment. But again, they'll be different. Do you see any other differences in using procurement principles in projects?
Well, I think you mentioned actually like many of them. That's why I was smiling from time to time when you were saying, because I have my experience also like in a project management side and also in procurement. And in many organizations I've seen when they're actually trying to aggregate the volume, as you mentioned, they're shifting towards lots of like category management and or even like trying to optimize the cost. Again, the aggregation is just to get big volume discounts is made. Their projects has been they suffer it from like either supplier malperformance or from late deliveries. Many organizations actually trying to optimize their cost of procurement, shifting towards decentralized procurement. And again, project performance is suffered as well. So here actually, since we are talking about the local optimizations and again, local in terms of the company point of view, local optimizations. And by these local optimizations, we can say that our global project performance is suffering. And the same as, I think is towards the same optimization, companies trying to shift more volume towards category management. Actually, what do you think, which factors shall be vitally taken into consideration when organization approaching project procurement management, sorry?
Well, if I slightly put to one side if companies are treating category management as only volume aggregation, that's all they're doing. They're not doing category management. They're not managing the category. Good category management simply thinks, what does our organization need for this supply base? And how do we work with it to get the best for our company. If they're force fitting a standard answer, let's do some big deals. Calling that category management doesn't make it good category management. But it does confuse people. Where we procurement professionals, we give it a fancy name pretending it's different. No, we're just doing some volume aggregation deals. That's all we're doing. Don't over-egg it. And in some categories, that makes an awful lot of sense. But within a project, because of the nature of project, yes, I would approach things very differently. As I said, I think the procurement expertise needed to help projects is how do we set up our execution strategy to maximize the contribution from our external supply base. We're going to need an external supply base. How do we make the best of it? just like developing any procurement strategy should start with that. What do we know about what's happening at the moment? What should we do within different timescales to improve value and reduce risk? Now, all things being equal, my experience has told me that if I'm doing that, I would firstly look to set up a collaboratively contracted project team. So my default procurement approach would be multi-party contracts, early engagement and selection of the key parties that I need. That selection would be based on capability, competence, not thinking up a number that they promise me. Price, as you've just said in a couple of examples, the price you pay for the thing is related to how much it costs you, but isn't the same. And trying to minimize the price you pay doesn't minimize the cost. Absolutely. Always. Yeah. And certainly not in complex emergent environments like projects. There's no logic or scientific backing that says the best way to procure the elements of the project is to pretend that they're identical commodities. That's as useful as putting, wheels that work well on railway cars onto motor cars.
Yeah.
They makes no sense because motor cars have a different job to do. So I would start with the idea of a multi-party contract known as either a project alliance or IPD. Select the main parties early, as quickly as possible. It can still be competitive, by the way. It's just they're not competing on an invented price. They're competing on their skill and capability. And the parties that sign up to that project alliance, integrated project delivery team, the companies that sign up will also sign up to aligned commercial interests. That means they all do better or they all do worse together. There's no way for one of the team members to walk away making a fortune, but others lose their shirt and go out of business. Commercially, contractually, that is not possible on a project alliance. And what it means is people need to and do look out for each other. If somebody's having a problem, initially, everybody else supports them. And if they're really not that good, you get rid of them. But everybody has an interest in that, not only the ultimate owner. How many projects might you have a contractor or a subcontractor where the people working on the job know that they're not pulling their weight, know that something's going wrong? Yeah. The owner doesn't know. And the other suppliers and contracts think, well, that's not my job. It's not hurting me. In fact, I might make some profit out of this later, because when things go wrong with that chosen supplier, I will be employed to fix the problem. So you've got inherently conflicting commercial drivers in many projects today that simply mean you add an extra layer of control and administration that slows the project up, adds to the cost, and we still have problems. Yeah, look, you just need to look at the number of major projects that end up in courts, which of course will be a small fraction of major projects that have problems that get negotiated. There's far too many.
Yes, indeed.
Collaboratively contracted projects have many fewer. There was some research in Australia about just over 10 years ago now that looked at public sector project alliance contracts, and it looked at, I think there was about 40 billion Australian dollars worth of projects, so maybe about 30 billion US dollars worth of projects, 100 or so projects, 50 to 100. They couldn't find $1 spent with external dispute resolution. That to me was the most striking statistic. Not one. The clients didn't change. It was still the public sector. If the projects had gone wrong, there would still have been pressure to, find somebody at fault. Now, the collaborative project alliance and IPD contracts, actually, they don't look to allocate blame and responsibility. Most conventional contracts are based on the premise that if something goes wrong, there's clearly somebody who needs to be at fault and they need to compensate. Whereas the idea of the Project Alliance IPD approach is we're all in this together, including the ultimate client, the project owner, and most of our performance will come from how we work together. And therefore, if we work together well, we'll all benefit. If not, we will suffer a shared amount of pain, and that will be it. We will not look for an individual scapegoat. We will accept that we collectively failed and we've made less money. But the mechanisms are such that none of them will potentially go out of business. And there are very few contractual mechanisms that allow somebody to go off and be taken to court. It needs somebody to be deliberately corrupt and deliberately act to make it not work. But it embraces the fact that we're all humans and we all make mistakes. And a well-managed project looks after each other, just like a well-managed team. So to select that sort of supplier, again, it's fundamental procurement practices to do it, but it is not the experience of many people in procurement.
Yeah.
So the fundamentals are the same. We find some suppliers who might be able to do this. We motivate and excite them about the opportunity. We get some proposals. We hopefully have a lot. We boil them down. We talk in more detail. We choose the company to work with, and then we agree the contract. That's exactly the same. But we also use procurement fundamentals like very often the customer needs the supplier more than the supplier needs the customer.
Yeah.
The desperate suppliers are often the bad suppliers. The best suppliers in the world probably don't need more customers. And very few procurement processes take that approach. So they actually put off the best suppliers because they're a pain to win work.
Yeah.
And in effect, if you bid to win work, it's going to be a costly thing. So your costs are going to go up and you want to recover that in the price. And if you're good, you can do that. The only people who put in low prices to win are the ones who are desperate for the work. And maybe there's a good reason they're desperate for work. i.e. they're not very good.
Well, in this actually is a very interesting things you mentioned. If the organizations understand this, if they could understand this actually, and taking into consideration the current situation between relationship, like buyer-supplier relationship, we can say that is, I mean, I cannot say that like win-win, is more like lose-lose, because bids assessing by the lowest price. In the end of the day, the client get their supplier, who, as you mentioned, desperate for the job. That means he's not very good supplier. And then the performance of the project eventually suffered, which again bring in a lot of cost for administration, for additional administrations. Plus, it affects the project schedule, which sometimes even more harmful for their entire, how to say, for entire organization, like for the clients, compared to even like budget increase. So why is organization still stuck of measuring procurement on the cost done?
Yeah, I get pedantic. It's priced down.
Yeah,
I totally disagree. Right. They're not even looking to minimize the cost on the project.
No.
They're looking to minimize the bid price at the moment at which they place the bid. Yeah, how often is that the final outcome price? Quite rarely, actually. But moving away from my being a pedant, why do people keep doing that? I don't know, and I think that's in part that's one of the reasons that at the end of my career I'm still keen to keep working, and I now work at a university, so I'm looking to pass on the hard lessons that my generation learned, so the next generation doesn't have to learn them from the beginning. I think I was probably lucky in my early career because I worked in an environment where I could make those decisions as a project manager. I could have the discussions with my boss and said, hey, this looks a great way to do it. Shall we have a go? And the boss would say yes. And the first time I worked in a project alliance, it was, I was actually a supplier then. So my early career, I'd done projects as the project owner organization. But then I moved to a different job where I was providing services to chemical companies, professional services, but I was a supplier. And on a project there, we agreed to work as a project alliance collaborative contract. But the senior manager within the chemical company that we worked with just got it. He understood it and he wanted it applied. And he didn't have anybody telling him, no, you can't do that. So I think in part there's an awareness. I've looked a lot at project management bodies of knowledge and procurement bodies of knowledge in this environment, and I'm saddened that there is so little mention of it. I think there's also some significant structural areas of resistance in that the sort of industry that's built up and the expertise that's built up over many decades has been to control projects procured and managed in a particular way. So there's lots of people, there's some very, very large companies, influential companies that have got used to working in a particular way. And if you've got a reasonable business and it's the skill that you know, then there's quite a lot of inertia to keep you working in that way. Change is seen as small and incremental. But if you move to collaborative contracting, what do you do with all the lawyers whose main role is in litigating contractual disputes? What would happen in Australia? And I would see that. I would see papers written by lawyers and legal companies saying, sort of accepting the evidence that this is a good thing, but then sort of presenting counter views or inventing counter views that sort of protect their self-interest. And I think that creates a lot of resistance. I think another big chunk of general management philosophy is based on assuming that working environments are quite simple, deterministic systems. Give me a commitment and meet it. That's the prevailing management method. Tell me when you'll be finished and get on and do it. And that's fine. But when you start holding people to account for that and managing their careers and sacking people, that's where it becomes problematic, because in a real world, very few people influence their own results. We're not a cog in a complex machine. That, you know, what you do impacts on what I do and what the people next to me impact. And taking account of that makes management more challenging. However, it makes results better. So I think there's also that challenge of, well, how do I manage my team if I measure the performance on the output of the whole team? How do I know who's pulling their weight and not? And that desire to be able to mark and score the individual parts, is fundamentally counter to improving the performance of a complex system. You know, if you look, and doesn't mean there's nothing for managers to do, by the way. You still need to make sure the parts of the system work together well. And on occasion, there will be elements that need changing out because they just don't fit and don't work well. But there's no black and white spreadsheet that will tell you which parts are good and bad. It's inherent in the uncertain nature of real projects, complex procurements, and almost all projects, and a working environment. They're example of complex adaptive systems. They've got emergence and interdependency and uncertainty in them. And if you try and manage them as though they are simple systems, the chances of success are very low.
Yeah, it doesn't work in an independent environment. It's all dependent, and it's complex system. Is the one like the work of one of the member affect not even the next one, affect many of them. And there are, as you mentioned, a lot of uncertainties, which is make it even more complex. And I don't know, what do you think? Maybe it should be changed of maybe general management concepts of change of the paradigms, how we manage their project environments?
Yeah, there are underlying rules and principles that would help. Some people get it. Some people get it after many, many years of experience. And that's where we see today's successful large projects. The project directors with 40 years of experience have learned some of the things that work and don't work. And so they can work in the prevailing environment, but minimize the damage it causes. The trouble is, when you start at the earlier in your career, you're either naturally gifted or lucky, but we're requiring people to learn the same lessons again. And it, for me, it's not a method of managing that says it's going to take us 30 years to develop good project managers and directors, and it's going to be very expensive because they're going to learn by making mistakes, or they're going to get to the top just by being lucky, and that's no use, because you can't keep being lucky. They won't know what to do when the luck changes. So I agree, Ludmilla, and that's one of the things that we're doing on the Masters in Industrial Project Management that I teach on at the University of Birmingham. So I joined because we had a project to develop and add elements to the program, and that's what attracted me to it. So we don't lose the conventional knowledge of project management, because anybody managing in that environment needs to understand what the conventions are and which parts of the conventions are fully compatible to the sort of underpinning science. But what we've done is we've introduced the that underpinning science that you've mentioned about, you know, complex systems and organizations, and how some things help and some things don't help. But that, again, just that knowledge doesn't help people to manage. Knowing that it's complex is not very helpful. And that's where we look to drill down to the next level of saying, and here are some methods that are more aligned to the way complex systems work and give you a much better chance of success. And some of those that come from bodies of knowledge like theory of constraints, they bring methods that people can start with, they can copy, and whilst they'll never be perfect, they'll move them in the right direction to be less susceptible to dependencies and uncertainty and variability. That you don't make uncertainty go away just because you've got Primavera P6 and you put 100,000 activities in your schedule and link them together. But they're still guesses.
This is just a tool which help you to expedite the process. It's not make you thinking for you.
Well, it can go the wrong way, because if the tools, no matter how common, have got the wrong thinking embedded into them, they actually don't help you. You know, having more information doesn't help you. Big data is not valuable. In some circumstances, it's worth playing with and seeing what you can find. But if you're managing a project, knowledge of what happened in the past 15 projects is not going to tell you what to do in your project now. That's like driving a car and going around the corner, knowing that in 99.5% of times that people have driven around this corner, there's been nothing in the way. No, you always drive, because today there could be, you know, a child that's just escaped from its parents, or an accident that you'll run into the back of.
Yeah.
The fact that it happened in the past, you know, can lead you to some insight, but it's not going to fix all problems, because procurement and project management, as we've both said, you can't optimize. You can never get enough data. You need a good enough decision. What Nobel Prize winner Herbert Simon called satisficing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you need little heuristics that help you get a better answer than another common one. You can compare the two. Whether it's optimum, you'll never know. And so things like that, you know, techniques like that, if you can start to bed them in to the way that the organization works. But like many innovations, you know, the problem comes when a new manager comes in, they want to make the mark. Sometimes it's, well, I need to change something. I've not come across that. It must be bad. Or there's some rules coming from head office that say we've got to do things this way. And people either change for quiet life, or they just keep the head down and don't make any noise because they know that head office will spoil it and break it. And that's sad, but it's something that I come across far too often, that the people doing the work know it's a dumb thing, but they're not working in a managerial culture that will allow them to point out, because senior managers in those environments are never allowed to be wrong. And if you point out that somebody's wrong, they're still wrong, but you get sacked.
Yeah, true.
Because it's a sort of blame environment, or your career gets harmed and damaged. But since most organizations work in a similar way, they can still compete with one another. That's the sad bit. And even if one organization leaps away and pulls away from the others, yeah, very often, if they don't realize what's causing it and what's driving it, then change is very slow. We see that in the example of Toyota and the Toyota production system that's become lean.
Yeah.
As I understand it, yeah, the people at Toyota in the 70s realized that letting people see what they're doing will not result in competitors catching them up, because they just won't get it. And time has shown there's a lot to that. Toyota consistently has made more money and been more successful than many other automotive companies, over the long period of time. And so I think it's the same in this environment, but I think it's even more difficult with projects, because there's a lot of project clients who don't need projects all the time. So there's a few who do. In the Middle East, you've got some of the large development companies who've always got projects going on. So they have a long-term understanding, and they could certainly leverage and implement approaches like those I'm talking about. But others have, normal business, a project, normal business, a project. So don't sort of have that regular interaction and knowledge of the body of knowledge. And they go to the specialists who've got a vested interest in doing it a particular way. And unless they happen to have come across and remember that there are alternatives, what the mindset is, well, this is how this industry works. We better learn the way they work and go along with it. Because, just like you and I buying a car, we cannot influence the car industry. We have to take it as it is and make the most of it. Like buying from Microsoft, you learn enough about it and you find the best way to buy, but you're not going to use your power as a buyer to get anything out of Microsoft.
Yeah.
And I think it's often the same with projects. If I look back at the industries that did manage to get some degree of change, if I look back at the oil and gas industry in the UK in the early 90s, that got together as an industry and with the supply base and started to implement a much more collaborative approach to contracting and projects. You may or may not be aware, it was called CRINE.
Yeah,
as in,
I know this one, yes.
Yep. So CRINE, and that, one of the difficulties now is it was in the day before almost everything was put on the internet. So it's actually quite hard to find out about it. And my first project alliance was in the late 90s. We worked on the onshore chemical industry, but basically we'd heard about these. It made perfect sense. We said, let's give it a go. And that was it. Yeah, I think we read a few articles, got the concepts and went for it. And it was very successful. But that was driven by some very large oil companies, the Shells, the BPs, the Exxons, or whoever was there. They got together, there was a few of them, and of course the supply base said, of course we'll do what you ask. And they also had a collective problem, which was the oil price has fallen. If we cannot find a faster, more reliable, more cost-effective way of developing new production facilities, there won't be any.
Yeah.
So in effect, that innovation initiative, there was a common objective for everybody. If we can't get rid of the waste, if we can't become smarter, then it's the end for all of us. And that's what drove. But it was driven by the ultimate owners. Now, in other construction fields, like say real estate and building, there are very few great big owners who've come together, taken that lead. They've not been in what you could call a burning bridge situation, where if we don't get our act together, everything will stop. So maybe there's some things like that, if you don't have a shock, then major change is very, very difficult. I don't know, I'm speculating as to why people don't do it, because I don't understand. You know, I'm a simple bloke, so why wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, it makes common sense actually, but for whatever reasons, it still doesn't happen in industry. And even if we speak in supplier relation, buyer-supplier relationship, we see lose-lose situation. And very often, actually, as you like mentioned example, if we will not find reliable supply base, we cannot build the project, we cannot just make it happen. But there are still, there's a good example which you mentioned of collaborative relationship, but there are only few, unfortunately, it's not only in the industry, like everywhere in the entire world. And actually, I would like to know your opinion on how organization actually can shift their mindset and develop the collaborative approach.
Just give it a go. One of the things in a project environment is you can actually isolate things. In terms of risk management, it's not a big bang. You can make a start, give it a chance, and you can keep an eye on it. You can always fall back onto plan B. That's one of the things with setting up a collaborative team. So if I use early selection and engagement to set up a team to develop ideas for a project, to come up with creative and innovative ideas during the design and the planning stage, and I've used early selection. So I'm moving away from what might be more conventional, which says I'll get a designer, they will design something in detail that I will bid to the construction market, and that will take a long period of time, and then I'll choose the cheapest, and then we'll build and police them. So I've pulled the decisions forwards, but I as a client can watch and observe how this project's going. And if I think it's going in a very bad direction, I can still drop back to how I would before. I've not lost anything. Because if you work collaboratively and under an alliance, then you should be ahead of the time scale. You should be taking a lot less time than you would have done conventionally. So dropping back to your more conventional plan B is not costing you anything.
Yeah,
and it's not that difficult to have the contractual basis of the early engagement that says to the suppliers, look, if the owner changes their mind, you'll still get reimbursed for the work you do at the beginning in a fair way. And from the owner's point of view, they would always have paid for designers to do that work. They're not paying any more. But what they are doing is, as well as designers, they've got some of the key manufacturers. They've got the construction organization. So you're designing in constructability. You're designing in activities that make for more efficiency on the construction site. You will be building in information systems and 3D design tools that are designed and used in a way that helps improve the flow on the construction site. So you're freeing up the time for creativity. You're removing the commercial barriers for organizations coming up with great ideas. So if the steelwork specialist says you should really do that in concrete, now that means they get less income, but under an alliance, they still make money from being part of the team. And if it's in the client's interest, they will make more profit by selling less steel and encouraging the client to buy concrete. Because that's what you want. Otherwise, you'll inhibit those ideas. And everybody will know it would have been cheaper and faster to build in a different material, but except the owner.
Yeah, in the end of the day, the collaborative approach is promoting innovation. And again, if we speak about local optimization, when their like procurement professionals squeeze supplier for the price, they actually blocking it in terms of this way, because like if you, as you mentioned to your example, the steel supplier will be interested to sell more steel only, regardless whether it's harmful for the project, whether it's harmful for the client or not. And actually, in the current environment, I had like conversations with some of their companies, like suppliers. They sometimes, if they come up with new ideas, how they can make the project better, how they can help the client to save money, but very often, I mean, quite often, it can harm their own profitability. They just keep silent. They just will not say anything, because it's lose-lose situation. And I can see that collaborative approach can actually be beneficial from both sides, but again, it needs to be implemented in a smart way.
The other thing with innovation and creativity is you only know what works after you've done it.
Exactly.
So the creative process itself is very, very messy and uncertain. And so if you were procuring a team to be creative, it's a very simple procurement. You know, you get the right mix of people and you just allow them enough time. You say, okay, well, we'll pay you for a month. If you come up with some great ideas, great. If you don't, worth the investment. But the thing is, you don't know at the beginning whether it will come up with anything. That's inherent in the way the creative process works. So, you know, tying that to a commitment to come up with an invention is dumb. You just prevent inventions. And actually, there's another dimension that's also been demonstrated, that if there is too much of a reward and pain hanging on being creative, it reduces the ability of humans to be creative.
Yeah, I bet to be on the safe side.
Yeah, there's a mix of the inherent avoidance of pain is much more important than gaining a little bit extra. But even if there's no pain, if suddenly a big prize is added to a problem, there's been quite a lot of very simple psychological studies where people have been given a team problem solving activity. And it's been demonstrated, if the team has a big prize for beating another team and being faster, the performance goes down. So, yeah, anyone who says, well, we need to sort of have more skin in the game, we need to get them to be innovative. Well, there's no evidence that humans work that way. There's actually lots of evidence it's the wrong thing to do. But you know, we allow senior managers to make intuitive decisions that are wrong. Now, and that's something else that some people might think is either difficult or controversial, because in both procurement and project management, I know lots of people who say, well, the reason I did that is the sponsor, the executive, the boss wanted me to do it that way. I think, well, if you are really a profession, shouldn't you tell the boss when they're being dumb? Would a doctor cut my arm off because I was his customer and said, my arm's aching, please amputate it? No. A good doctor would find out what's wrong, would tell me I'm being stupid, and I wouldn't say, look, I'm the client. I'd say, you're the doctor, tell me. So why won't procurement professionals do that? I think you used the term procurement professional early on, and I'll be controversial, and anyone watching this who's been in training rooms with me will know I'd say it face to face, slightly tongue in cheek, but that's a procurement amateur.
True.
If all you do is try and minimize the price and get a saving. Now, you might be doing it because if you don't, your boss will sack you. And that's a very wise thing to do if you've got a family to feed.
Yeah.
But And yeah, and I think there's lots in the medical profession who will keep their head down and do what their paymasters tell them. And there's over the centuries, there's been cases like that where new innovations have come into science and technology and medicine that are different, and people have been put under pressure not to apply them. You'll find that all over the place today with the coronavirus, and it's the same human characteristic. I think that there's, if we're really a profession, think of an engineer. Would an engineer make the steel thinner than the calculation just because the sponsor wanted it thin?
No, never.
Or if they did, they would quite rightly be the people who would be subject to prosecution for breaching their professional. So, but what about a procurement professional who advises the client to get a fixed price lump sum turnkey project that's going to cost them 25% more, and it'll probably take 25% longer? Now there is a defense that said, because this is what the majority of people do. But again, you can use a computer for that, to copy everybody else.
Yeah.
You don't need a professional. You can get junior staff. The only point in having very expensive professional staff is to make a judgment that there aren't any rules about, and sort of, we'll copy everybody else. You don't need to pay somebody big bucks to copy everybody else. But that's as I say, I'm getting to be a grumpy old man, because I'm closer to the end of my career, and it frustrates me as to why organizations waste so much. They strive to get certainty with something that intuitively seems the right thing to do, but there's almost no evidence that it works.
Yeah.
And there's lots of evidence this doesn't work, but if somebody says, let's try something different, oh no, we can't do that.
No, we've always done this way. Let's continue doing this way, even if it doesn't work.
Yeah, but nobody had a problem changing their sports gear because something new's come out. Nobody said, well, I've used these. Some people do, but if they play golf, they'll get some new shiny golf clubs that come along and give them a go. Well, that's what I would do here. Give this a go. If somebody's intrigued, think, well, let's do your own research. But there's plenty of research that said these things, when done well, can deliver much better projects. Okay, let's learn how to use it. Let's give it a go on one project. I think there's nothing to lose. You can always drop back onto how you've done things before if you get scared. But the managers will have to make a managerial judgment and say, this looks a lot better. But I don't even think the risk is high.
Yeah, talking about, by the way, about different methods and new methods, and you mentioned before the theory of constraints. Which actually principles of theory of constraints, from your point of view, could be applicable to the managing project procurement?
A few of them. So I think generally it's relevant, and if you'll know theory of constraints, but people listening may or may not do. But within the body of knowledge, firstly, it's designed as a set of tools and techniques that work well in managing complex systems with interdependencies, uncertainty, and emergent behaviors. So inherently, they're more appropriate for real world things like projects and complex procurement. So within the TOC body of knowledge, again, I'm simplifying, there are some set of general tools and techniques that you can use in sort of problem identification and problem planning environments. And I think those can be a very useful addition to the toolkit of project managers, particularly in the early stages of the project, when we're thinking, what should we do? What's the opportunity? What should we include? If we do this, will it deliver the business outcomes and benefits that we expect? So some of those generic tools can help add a bit of rigor to the gut feel that is often part of developing project strategy. And one of the sort of smaller general tools and techniques that I use quite often is one that is useful in facilitating the resolution of conflicts. And within a project environment, those crop up all the time. And that's good. You know, good teams are not scared of conflict, because there's different views, and you know, it can't be the best to go right. You know, the turn right at this junction, turn left. You know, one of them will be a better answer than the other. So let's understand the differences of opinion and come to a collective conclusion. And some of the very simple tools can help the facilitative role of both a project manager and anybody involved in the procurement of the project.
Yeah, it's very, very important to find the common view on the problems. So it will be easier to find the solution then, rather than just to have their contradictory opinion about it, just constantly fighting who is right, who is wrong.
Yeah, a good project manager needs to resolve those issues, as a good procurement manager does. So I think those are useful tools to add to the professional toolkit. If we look at the other half of theory of constraints, which are particular applications that have been developed over time to use in different operating environments. You know, behind you, you've got the critical chain book. So that's the theory of constraints methodology, generic methodology for managing projects and portfolios of projects. Although the portfolios bit was added after Goldrat's book behind you, that just looks at individual projects. And you know, projects of a certain kind, not 100% of projects, but projects of a certain kind, particularly those we're talking about, major capex construction, I think can benefit from integrating the critical chain methodology as opposed to critical path.
Yeah.
And the thinking behind it. Now, that relates to the other topic about procurement, because critical chain it assumes a collaborative project team. So I think one of the reasons that most critical chain success stories in the last 2 decades have been not in the construction and capex environment, there've been some, but not as many as other environments, is because the contracting nature prevents collaboration. It inhibits collaboration. So methods like critical chain will not be as beneficial because they require a team-based focus.
Yeah.
So I think they're brilliantly compatible with the collaborative project alliance IPD approaches. That will allow project teams to exploit and use methods like critical chain, which, as I said, are more suited to the uncertain nature of projects. Yeah, an estimate is not a commitment; it's a guess. And if you use these guesses in a particular way, you can actually get quite a reliable total for the whole project. But what's not reliable is the estimate for the individual activity. So critical chain sort of shifts the focus from the problem with the plan is the plan wasn't detailed enough because real world didn't work like the plan, so we need to plan better, which is an impossibility, but that tends to be the mindset. And it says, we need a good enough plan, but let's get better in delivering execution. Let's know what to look for and how to react to it early to make sure that we reduce the impact of the unexpected and the uncertainties that are going to happen, and what we should focus on to make the actual delivery of the work less wasteful. And that's a shift from the more conventional project planning, and that needs the right procurement environment. Now, on on large projects, I think there are other applications from theory of constraints that are also applicable. So you've got the techniques that were developed in manufacturing and distribution that help the flow of materials. And if you're establishing a complex construction site, flow of materials and delay is an important thing that needs managing. So knowledge of and the application of some of those TOC methods can help the flow of materials and the flow of work during the design in order just to maximize that whole flow during the delivery stages of projects. So there's some, in effect, out-of-the-box techniques that work well and have been shown to work better than many of the alternatives that exist. Better than using the MRP calculation built into your ERP system to decide whether to replenish stock and when to order more. Things like that.
Yeah.
Which you need on a construction site. You don't want to run out of tools or PPE or soil or infill or concrete or whatever it is you're using. You need to manage that flow. And so I think within complex project environments, taking some of those methods, using them and then improving upon them is a great way for projects to take the next step up. But that does require actually the project owner organization and their project managers to move from managing contracts to managing projects. Because if you manage contracts and you think this is arm's length, I will let the supplier get on with this.
Yeah.
Even though they're inefficient. The idea of market competition can sometimes get in the way, because what you want as an owner is the work to flow as quickly as possible. You will want your mall to be open as soon as possible, generating positive cash flow. You'll want the hospital to be helping make people better earlier rather than later. If you're in that environment, you would want it to cost 150 million rather than 200 million and to be open 6 months earlier, because you can use the extra 50 million of investment for another smaller hospital or towards the next project, or just as extra profit to pay the business owners. Who cares? But that's why also striving to deliver better for me should be more the business objective, not striving to hit the targets. Does that make sense?
Absolutely makes sense. Actually, I think I have only the last question remaining I would like to ask you. Yeah. You mentioned that project procurement is your passion. So what is exactly attracts your attention to the subject?
As I said, I'm a frustrated old man. I started being involved in projects straight out of university over 35 years ago. And now, it's somewhat sad that the next generation, young project managers, young procurement managers, are having to learn the same things. And if anything, some of it's gone a step or two backwards. So that's what sort of drives my ongoing sort of passion and excitement, is a frustration that my generation have not embedded enough knowledge so that the next generation can build on that, can in effect stand on our shoulders. It's learning the same lessons that we learnt. Now, in all fairness, much of my generation did the same. If you look back at history, many of today's innovations have been known for decades, if not centuries. There's now, consultancies may need to rebrand them and pretend that they're new, but if you're being honest, it isn't new. It's a fundamental for how organizations work, and it's been known before. We have just forgotten it. So that's what drives me is wanting the next generation to learn their own things, make their own mistakes, but not to make the same mistakes that we made. That's what I find a tragedy. I don't want to finally retire until at least I've passed some of what I and my generation have learnt. And particularly what I see as the two most significant innovations to emerge in this field during my career, which the fundamental principles have been known, but they emerged as a usable method that can be applied elsewhere. The collaborative contracting of projects using project alliances and IPD, the critical chain scheduling and execution method. I would, for me, those would be my defaults. That's where I would start. I wouldn't bother with other things, and that's what I want. Hopefully, at least one or two people early in their career to pick up and in effect run with that ball.
I think it's very important to pass the things you learned during like your experience to the next generation, because it's an evolving process. You learn something during your life, your experience, your working experience, you pass it to other generations. Based on your learning, they can build something new already, and not repeat exactly the same mistake, or maybe not try to learn something. I think it's also quite natural process to do so. But unfortunately, what we see now is we have a cycle when the same generation just doing the same mistakes all over and over again. And there is no continuous learning. So I'm actually very glad to hear that you're trying to pass it to other generations and to help people to find the better solutions in their work life. So I think that's it for this project procurement subject. It was very interesting and very insightful conversation. Thank you very much, Ian, and thanks a lot for your ideas, for your valuable inputs. I hope really audience will enjoy it a lot, and I also hope that they can take and they can learn some lessons from our today's conversation.
Hopefully, and thanks for asking me, Ludmila. I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
That is all for today about Project Procurement Management. I hope you enjoyed the episode and find lots of valuable information. And I see you next time.